So most people don't deal with dead bodies, full stop, unless you're unfortunate enough that you go and visit your gran and unfortunately she can't wake her up and you find her in bed dead or something like that. So it is not a bad thing to, I mean, part of your training, they make you go to a post-mortem, and then the post-mortem technicians seem to take great delight in, there's usually a big metal bowl where they put all the innards in front of you to see if you're going to faint or not, because the smell's not particularly nice. My name's Nigel Bowen. I joined the police in 1989 as a fresh-faced 21-year-old. Started at Peterborough, did about 18 months at Peterborough. The reason they sent me to Peterborough was because I was living where I live now, and they had a tradition of you don't want to deal with the people that you know where you lived. Then on a part-time basis, I became a firearms officer, so unlike now where they all drive around in cars and if you get a firearms job you go straight to it, then you had to go to Parkside, go to the gun safe, get the guns out, then go to the job. Did that for about 18 months as well. Sort of used it as a way to get onto traffic because they were going to start doing armed response vehicles and it was an easy way to get onto traffic. So I went onto traffic in about 92 and then I taught on all sorts of different courses from can you safely drive a police car, A to B within the speed limits, to can you pursue somebody down the motorway at speed. So, and then finished in 2019.
Going back to say like 1988, why did you join the police force? What was it that piqued your interest?
Sounds a bit corny, but it was to genuinely help people. Because where I'd grown up in rural North Yorkshire, there was still village police officers and stuff like that. And they, all right, if you did something wrong, they came down on you. But generally, it's somebody that you could trust and would help you if you had a problem. People would say, well, don't you think about having seen the miners' strike in the sort of mid-80s on the TV? And I suppose I was aware of that, but I was still doing my O-levels and stuff like that then, so you're less politically aware than if you'd been a little bit older. So I hadn't got that. If I'd lived in a mining village in Derbyshire or somewhere like that, it might have been a bit different.
And what sort of things would you be taught in the...
Well, it was interesting, really. So you get taught law, what the law says, but they didn't actually teach you a lot about how to interpret it. There's this lovely phrase in a lot of the legislation that says reasonable cause. And if you ever said to somebody, what is reasonable cause, they'd never give you a direct answer. But what they'd try and get you to is answer it yourself. Well, that's fine up to a point, but you reach a point where you need somebody to say, this is an example of what would be, this is an example of what wouldn't be. We used to do riot training 2 or 3 times a week, get petrol bombed, things like that.
I bet that was a bit of a laugh when you were younger.
Yeah, you learned to tuck your chin down because otherwise you'd lose your eyebrows. You didn't make a seal with a visor off the helmet, you lost your eyebrows.
So did you have to use any of those skills that you've been taught, like tucking your chin in and all that sort of thing?
Well, we never got petrol bombed in real life, but there's plenty of times where you had to... I mean, later on, I tended to drive the vans around because you had to be a certain age to drive the vans, and as you got older in the police force, less people could drive the vans, which is another story of the police not asking for an exemption in the law, but that's a different matter. So I tended to drive the vans and have to move the vans into various places while the other people were forming lines and things. There were some people that were quite naive at training school. There was a girl from Essex who didn't believe me that you had to work nights. She thought that some special part of the police force came in and worked nights, and she just worked days, and she resigned. It was quite militaristic. There was drill every morning and things like that, and your appearance had to be immaculate, like bulled shoes and, pressed uniform and things like that, which I know why they did it. It was a bit of a pain because they'd say it's not good enough and not good enough, but it's just trying to get that self-discipline in yourself, which these days, if you look at a lot of police officers, they don't really look very tidily turned out, and that tends to reflect on other things, I think.
Wearing rainbow helmets and things like that?
It's not so much that... I mean, that's more of a political thing. It's just their general appearance, and nobody seems to care about it either. A little thing like wearing hats. If you go to an incident somewhere and you see the police there's very few of them wearing hats. And there's a reason why you wear a hat, is so that other people can see you're in the police, and therefore they can pick you out and come to help you rather than get caught up in the general melee. It sounds a bit silly, but it's just a minor point.
Going back to when you were driving vans during riots, what did it feel like to sit in the driver's seat of a van and have loads of people banging and things like that? Did
Well,
anything like that happen?
there's two states, you see. They're either all asleep because they've been on their feet for 16 hours, and the police isn't very good, or wasn't very good, at managing people's time. So if it was something simple, like when the Tour de France came to Cambridge, I think we did an 18-hour day by the time you get in early, pick people up, take them to have the breakfast, have a briefing, and then you go to Cambridge, and we parked in Tennis Court Road, and we were there for like 15 or 16 hours.
How does the police deal with normal policing when big events like that are on? What's the contingency for that?
There's no special pot of police officers, they just cancel people's days off. It's like when there's any incident and they say, oh, there'll be extra patrols. There won't be. They'll just take them off something else or cancel people's days off.
So if you've booked a holiday for 2 weeks and the Tour de France is right in the middle of that 2 weeks...
Depends when you'd booked it. You have to be quite shrewd about booking things. Christmas was always the thing. When we started collaborating with Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, they'd got different rules. So if you were on traffic then, bearing in mind you're in a combined team, you couldn't book your holiday until, say, 6 months before Christmas, but they were allowed to book it a year ahead. So, of course, if they'd got families, they all booked their days off a year ahead, and you got to it and you think, well, I've got to work Christmas again.
Describe being a beat bobby. What?
Well, first
some
day,
people might not remember or know what a beat bobby is.
So when I started at Peterborough, we had 20 to 25 people on a shift. So you'd turn up for your 6 o'clock shift. You'd always have to be there 15 minutes early, so you'd have a briefing. And as I say, 20 to 25 on a shift, so that meant you'd probably turn out with holiday sickness 18 or 20 people. So there used to be a lot of officers in uniform on the streets, probably more than there are now. Great, first job in the police. I thought it was excellent because it was, bizarrely enough, some cows had got loose on the edge of Peterborough. And this bloke I was with, he was a real city boy, didn't know what to do, but coming up from rural North Yorkshire, I just rounded him up and put him in the field. They thought it was great. Then you learnt how to walk the city because you have to know premises. So they used to make you check various premises, and your sergeant would be slightly sneaky and lay little traps for you, like he'd tie a bit of string somewhere to see if you'd disturbed the string, if you'd done your checks or not. Interacting with anybody from tourists that wanted to do stuff. A friend of mine got the nickname Cuffy because he was showing off to an American and he handcuffed the American. Thank you very much, take the picture. And then they said, can you take him off? And he couldn't find a key. So, of course, that nobody forgets that sort of thing.
What else are you looking for when you're strolling the streets on a beat?
Anything that's unusual, really. Just out of the ordinary. I mean, there's a very wide range of people walk around city centres, and you almost need to get taught certain things. So you usually had, when you were starting out, you had somebody that tutored you, for want of a better phrase, and they would try and steer your thinking to what you should be as a suspicious policeman or woman, and then they were trying to say, look for this, look for that. For argument's sake, go to a burglar alarm, don't walk up with your torches or flashing, because if you did, the burglars will see you coming and go away. It depends if you want to catch them or not, doesn't it? So most people don't deal with dead bodies, full stop, unless you're unfortunate enough that you go and visit your gran, and unfortunately you can't wake her up and you find her in bed dead or something like that. So most people don't, so it is not a bad thing to... I mean, part of your training, they make you go to a post-mortem, and then the post-mortem technicians seem to take great delight in... There's usually a big metal bowl where they put all the innards in front of you to see if you're going to faint or not, because the smell's not particularly nice. Being on traffic, you went to quite a few post-mortems because you wanted to find out if it was a natural cause thing or if it was something that was, say, a classic deceleration injury, which would be you tear your aorta, main blood vessel to your heart, because if your car stops quickly, the car stops but your body doesn't. Or if your body does, the bits inside it don't, and that's what will kill you quite often. Do
you remember seeing your first dead body?
I think it'd be somebody in Peterborough that had been in somebody living on their own, and they'd been there quite a while, and unfortunately it was in summer, so you tend to... it's a smell that gets you to start with, and then people notice all the flies and things like that. And that's not pleasant, because you've got to search a body to make sure there's no signs of foul play. There's not a knife sticking out their back or something. It sounds a bit melodramatic, but there was an incident in Wisbech a few years ago where somebody went to a house fire and found somebody dead inside, an elderly person. It turned out that it was a murder, and they treated it differently and until it was slightly late and they'd lost some of the evidence. But yeah, it's not pleasant seeing dead bodies on traffic. things had only just happened. So although people had got traumatic injuries, it was more understandable because you could see the mechanics of it. Because I haven't got any kids, I tended to have to deal with incidents involving people with kids. So there was before the A14 was all upgraded a long time ago, there was a drink driver went the wrong way down the A14 near Fen Stanton and crashed into a couple of cars and killed 6 people in total, I think. And I had to deal with the kids because everybody else at that time on our shift on traffic, they'd all got kids the same age as the 2 that had died. So
when you say deal with them, you mean speaking to their parents and family?
No, because the parents were dead as well. But what you have to do, you have to search their bodies for identification and things like that, and then you have to help the undertakers to get them to hospital or to the mortuary.
That must be something you can't really teach anyone, isn't it?
No, you can't, and I don't know, you just sort of accept it as part of the job. There were people that struggled with what people would now call PTSD, and I was just very lucky. If you made yourself busy, a little bit of black humour in terms of how you dealt with things, then that's fine. And I was very lucky that my wife's quite understanding. If she said, have you had a bad day, you could at least talk to her a bit about it. But there were other people that I worked with that really took it hard, and any time you knew if you were crewed them, any time there was anything to do with somebody dying, you just knew they shouldn't be dealing with it, you should be dealing with it.
And would the sergeants know that and try and sort of keep them off it? Or
sort of, yeah.
Sometimes you can't.
But then it reaches a point where if you're getting a lot of people dying, so typically we had about 100 people a year dying on the roads in Cambridgeshire. Now it's 40 if it's a bad year. So because of medical science and cars are far more safe than they used to be, that's why we used to have a big traffic department of 100 and odd people rather than 25 people or whatever there is now.
Have you got any stories of like unusual arrests? Any like anecdotal little things that stick in your mind, like, oh God, that time when that happened, that was bloody weird, wasn't it?
There's quite an interesting police chase pursuit, whatever you want to call it. There was a sort of 30-ton tipper lorry was stolen from Suffolk. So we meet Suffolk at the border, let this thing come past. We get on the back of it, and they eventually decide that they don't want to fund, so they leave and go back to their own area. And we started chasing it towards Cottenham. And then it turned off the 20 pence road into what's now an industrial area, but it wasn't then, it was just a farm track. And the bloke behind me was on the radio saying, get closer to him. And I said, something's not right here. I know this goes towards the back of the traveller's site, but something's not right. And of course, halfway down this track, he slams his brakes on and realises he can't get out the other end and just starts reversing at us. So I've never gone so fast backwards in a car looking for a gateway to just do a J-turn and get out of the way. Norfolk got run over by a tractor the other year because they were just following it. They think, oh, well, the police were invincible. And this thing just stopped and reversed all over the police car. So crushed it. Yeah, they were all right.
The guy in the tipper truck, how did that end?
I think he ended up running away, and thankfully we managed to catch him, because that's the good thing. There were plenty of... The fens are quite easy. If it was the middle of Cambridge, there's lots of places for him to run to. But if it's Cottenham and he's over the fens, you can have a helicopter. We had a helicopter then, that was great.
As soon as the helicopter's out, there's no escape, is there?
Not really. I mean, what you've got to think about is, at that point, there were less rules than there are now. Now, for the better, really, if you're chasing somebody, you can't just chase them until... We used to basically do it. They would crash, we would crash, we'd run out of fuel. They were the 3 things. Or somebody would get out and run. Now, you've got to have a plan as to how you're going to stop the pursuit before you can get it authorised to continue. There's got to be a little bit of slack, but you need to have a plan. And if you haven't got enough resources to do that, by putting a stinger over the road or something like that, then it shouldn't be authorised.
Might be a difficult one for you to answer, and you don't have to if you don't want to. Was there anything that distressed you?
There was, very early on when I went onto traffic, there was an incident in the middle of Cambridge where an elderly foreign tourist was driving an automatic, saw that there was a junction coming up, and they thought they were braking, but they weren't braking. They hit the wrong pedal and they were accelerating. And it's quite a well-known thing of unintended acceleration syndrome. A load of papers written on it. But it didn't help the poor mum and baby who were pushing the pram the other side of the road, and the baby got killed because the pram got thrown against the wall of King's College. So it's not pleasant. And of course, every time you then go into town and you go down that area, even now, you go various parts of the county. Like if I go down Bennett Street, I look at the end and I think, something nasty happened there. I don't like remembering that. And there's lots of places in the county like that. If you get anything to do with people that are in surveillance, they'll say to you at some point, can you just stop this car? And you know it's going to be a good job, because they don't say that for no reason. And they'll say, just do a routine check on this car, and there'll be something in the boot or in the spare wheel well or wherever. And we tried to stop the car near Ely, and we ended